This is video 2 of the financial journey of refugees. And in this video, we're going to actually talk about those financial journeys. The material came from a series of studies we undertook between 2016 and 2020, and we're very grateful for the support of our sponsors. In this video lecture, we learn how refugees and migrants amass funds for their journey and access them along the way. We explore financing mechanisms as well as financial ecosystems. And lastly, we look at key barriers that can completely halt a journey. So let's take our journey map. In this lecture, we're going to be looking at journey preparation and coping with moving. Our research. In 2016, in Greece, Turkey, and Jordan, and in 2018 and 19, in Costa Rica and Colombia, a team of students and I decided to study the funding and financing issues surrounding refugees and migrants, particularly those involved in long-distance journeys. Our goal was to understand how these travelers amassed funds before the journey and accessed money along the way. In our last lecture, we saw that most long-distance journeys cost anywhere between $1,000 and $41,000. That's a big swing. For those who crossed borders illegally, many financial matters had to be taken care of in advance. We also saw that how people paid their smugglers mattered, and we'll get to that today. How did people amass their funds? Well, they sold assets like gold, equipment, and in business inventory. They gathered in savings from banks or stashes around the home, or from money guards. Money guards are simply a traditional system where you might keep your excess funds with a shopkeeper or a trusted bookkeeper. Or they borrowed from friends and family, and often these loans were not expected to be paid back. They were called loans, but they weren't necessarily going to be paid back. Or they borrowed from financiers. We did not hear of many cases of this except for in the case of Nepal, where many people think investing in migrants is the best investment you can make. And yes, these financiers wanted their money back. So first, a note about smuggling. Except in cases where all travel could be managed with visas and short-term transit passes, most long-distance journeyers in our study procured smuggling services. The actors typically include a kingpin who masterminds the job across multiple continents, and the kingpin works with a series of intermediaries and local passers. The networks. A long-distance journey will require engaging many local smuggling networks. For example, smugglers in Asia will coordinate with networks in South America to bring Nepalis as far as Costa Rica. Then they will engage a different network to bring them to the US border or to Canada. What do smugglers smuggle? Typically more than refugees and migrants. They're often ferrying drugs and contraband, and also perfectly legal goods. And I have down here, like coffins. We heard from more than a few families that were coming from Afghanistan that they were smuggled across in coffins on the border between Pakistan and Iran. And those were coffins that the smuggler was transporting legally. What services do smugglers provide? Well, some provide deluxe door-to-door services, and others will assist with pieces of a journey. For the door-to-door journey, here is what a smuggler might provide. Full travel arrangements. They'll organize plane and bus tickets, and even illicit travel, and every kind of modality you can imagine. Travel documents. They will procure fake IDs, fake passports, or real passports that have been stolen, as well as visa stamps. And many will provide food and lodging through safe houses or arrangements with local hotels. Often food is part of the smuggling package. A spending allowance. In some cases, smugglers will actually offer you a spending allowance as you move from one currency to another. And if you need a hard currency, they'll give that to you. So for example, smugglers in Peru would give people up to $1,000 to get as far as Panama. And there was an itemized list of what these people were intended, what the refugees could spend the money on. What were typical schemes to finance journeys? Smugglers might have preferred methods of payments in general, but each arrangement was bespoke. We review each in the next slides. First, the guarantee scheme with an agent. Second, the guarantee scheme with a bank. Third, the three tries approach. And four, the crowd-funded scheme with the pay-it-forward twist. So here's the guarantee scheme involving an agent. So you will have a starting point. You'll have a refugee. She finds a smuggler. Maybe that local smuggler is a recruiter and connects her to a kingpin. The lead smuggler then activates his local smuggling network. And at the same time, the refugee will find a local money agent. In this case, it's in Kabul. All the money agents are in the same place. That money agent will provide a host of services. One is to be a custodian for her funds. Refugee starts out. She gives the agent, let's say, $7,500. That agent then calls the kingpin smuggler and says, she paid me the money, she's good to go. The kingpin then asks the local smuggler to ferry the refugee to the first waypoint. At that waypoint, the smuggling network communicates with the kingpin that, in fact, she's arrived there safely. And at that point, the Sarif in Kabul pays the money, part of the money, to the lead smuggler. And this goes on again. Same thing, second waypoint. More money is released until finally all of the money is released as she gets to Germany. Here's the guarantee scheme involving a bank. This is an example from Nepal with a cost of about $40,000 to deliver the refugee to the United States. The smuggler gets paid as before when his network delivers the refugee to predetermined waypoints. But there's a difference. As the refugee reaches each waypoint, the smuggler notifies the family. The family then deposits the fee for that leg of the journey into the smuggler's bank account. They are often asked, the family is often asked to break the deposits down. So if it's a $10,000 deposit, they'll ask it for in much smaller payments so as not to create red flags at the bank. This is called smurfing, and it's a form of money laundering. The three tries approach. This is often used for shorter smuggling segments, for example, from Athens to Germany or Costa Rica around Nicaragua to Honduras. The smuggler charges a flat fee, for example, $800 to take a fishing boat around Nicaragua or $2,500 from Athens to Germany. The refugee or migrant pays up front and is guaranteed 3 attempts to complete the journey. The incentives are aligned. The smuggler makes more of a profit if he can deliver the refugee in the first or second try, but they have up to 3 tries. Then there's the guarantee scheme with the crowd-funded pay-it-forward twist, and this is from Eritrea. As in the previous example, the smuggler gets paid as his network delivers the refugee to each agreed-upon waypoint, in this case, Khartoum, Istanbul, Athens. And in this case, the refugee has no money. His sister lives in Khartoum. When her brother signals that he's ready to cross out of Eritrea, she contacts the smuggler. They negotiate a price. In this case, it's $12,500. The sister then contacts 20 or so members of the Eritrean diaspora. They send what they can to the sister's mobile money account, Zain. The refugee never has to repay that diaspora. But once he gets to Europe, he is expected to be part of the diaspora. And when the next refugee needs to flee Eritrea, he will be expected to help fund that person's journey. So remember how we said how one paid their smuggler mattered to their vulnerability? So on the one hand, the guarantee scheme offered protection from a smuggler taking their money, but then not providing the service. That's what worried a lot of people. I'll give him my $7,500 and I'll never see any service materialize at all. However, on the other hand, the guarantee scheme could backfire. So in this case, here's an example. Gorka traveled from Nepal to Costa Rica through South America. He was shot in Costa Rica and had to spend 2 months in a prison hospital, and then was unceremoniously dumped at the Costa Rican border. He could barely move. The only person he had the number for was his smuggler. Unfortunately, the smuggler wanted him to move on to Mexico, going around Nicaragua by boat, because that was the only way the smuggler was going to get paid. That was his next waypoint. However, he didn't want to go, and he was terrified to travel. So in this particular case, Fletcher was able to help him out. but it was a very terrifying situation. How did these people access funds along their routes? Well, people used a broad range of ways to fund themselves as they moved, both formal and informal. So there was remittances with formal providers, with the hawala, something that we call Kinship Finance, gifts and loans from fellow travelers, and of course, earning a living. Remittances from formal providers, like Western Union, MoneyGram. Well, the positives were that migrants and refugees expressed to us that these services were relatively reliable. But their concerns were that they complained of high fees, but worse, they complained about being charged double if they did not have the right documentation that the institutions required. Locals, including employees of these companies, would say they would offer up their IDs to collect the funds, but would charge an extra 10% for this service. Of course, this is illegal. Remittances through hawalas. So imagine in this case, we have a sender, and she's located in Pakistan, and she has a relative in Greece. She goes to her hawaldar, her money agent, and that money agent contacts his hawaldar, and that hawaldar then pays the receiver. And then the two hawaldars settle up because they're doing a lot of other kinds of business together. The positives were that migrants and refugees were extremely familiar with using these services and felt that some provided better services than even formal providers. For example, in Greece, one hawaldar would visit a refugee camp and bring remittances to the doorstep in that camp. He charged €7 because that was the cost of the bus fare. But everyone was happy because they could split that among themselves. The concerns are that in most countries, the hawala is not legal. Migrants and refugees know this and feel vulnerable to authorities when using the hawaldar services. Then there's something we call kinship finance. And this is very common practice among many different communities all over the world. And it looks something like this. We have somebody in Turkey, Adnan and Amira. They're Syrians and they're living in Turkey. They're friends. Then in Jordan, we have Adnan's sister, Hannah, and she lives in Jordan and she needs money. Adnan calls Muhammad, his friend in Jordan, and says, please give Hannah 50 Jordanian dollars. Muhammad does so. The next month, Amira needs money in Turkey. Muhammad calls Adnan and asks him to give Amira, his sister, 50 Jordanian dollars, and Adnan does so. The positives is this is a highly familiar way for people moving money around amongst friends and family. In Tunisia, they call this orange money, and we never could figure out why. The concerns are this system works when there are symmetrical transactions, and different parties can settle up through this. But when different amounts are sent, or when one relative is chronically in need, one person can end up deeply in debt. Plus, many don't write the numbers down. They have mental accounting, and they're subject to flawed memories. And this can cause quite a bit of consternation among family members. Gifts and loans from travelers and compassionate locals, particularly with South Asian and African migrants and refugees traveling in South America. Many had received gifts from locals in the form of food, clothing, money, even phones. Most had either given or received money from fellow travelers. Very few were trying to collect debts from each other. Co-travelers were not fussy about being paid back or about being paid back in full. Whoever received a remittance willingly shared it with co-travelers. And then there's earning money along the way. Both men and women would stop to earn money in order so they could save up and move on. This could be for a matter of days or weeks, as well as months or many, many years. For the less educated migrants and refugees, work included agricultural work, domestic cleaning work, working in kitchens, and construction. For the better educated, many could find work working with computers or working with online services. The positives of earning along the way was they could save up income to move on, the obvious. The concerns were because they lack work permits, they are often working under the table and feel severely exploited. Many didn't get paid at all. In summary, migrants and refugees have simple and complex ways of handling their money matters. For long-distance journeys, travelers without visas must rely on smugglers. Many of these travelers' strategies stem from previous strategies to which they had become accustomed. While many would have liked to use formal services or to have accessed formal kinds of work, those services and those kinds of work were simply not available to them. Thank you.